My story isn't easy to tell. It's heavy with secrets, burdened by years of silence. As the niece of a high-ranking Scientology leader, I grew up inside its carefully constructed reality. From the outside, it might have seemed glamorous, filled with celebrities and promises of spiritual enlightenment. But beneath the surface, a darkness festered, slowly choking the life out of my marriage. Scientology is shrouded in secrecy, its inner workings hidden from public view. Followers are indoctrinated with the belief that they are on a unique path to salvation. Doubts are silenced, questions are met with suspicion, and any criticism is seen as an attack. It's a world where control is paramount, where every aspect of your life is scrutinized and dictated by the church's teachings. This system wormed its way into my marriage, poisoning it from the inside out. Speaking out against Scientology comes at a steep price. It means risking the relationships you have with those still trapped within its grasp. It means facing the wrath of an organization known for its ruthless tactics against dissenters. But some truths are too important to stay silent. This is my story, the story of how Scientology's dark secrets infiltrated my marriage and tore it apart. My earliest memories are infused with Scientology. My aunt, a prominent figure within the church, painted it as a path to happiness. As a child, surrounded by what seemed like love and acceptance, I readily absorbed those beliefs. We were encouraged to be our best selves, to strive for excellence. Scientology wasn't about blind faith, it was about self-improvement. My parents saw the positive impact it had on me. I excelled in school, had a close-knit group of friends, and radiated confidence. I truly believed that Scientology held the key to happiness. As I grew older, the focus on self-improvement intensified. We were introduced to Dianetics, auditing, and the belief that we could rid ourselves of past traumas. It was intoxicating, this idea that we could fix ourselves. I threw myself into my studies, attending lectures and participating in auditing sessions. During this time, I met my future husband, deeply involved in Scientology. We were united by our shared beliefs and desire for spiritual growth. Looking back, I see how easily we were swept up in the fervor of it all. Our wedding was a Scientology affair, officiated by a high-ranking church official. It was a joyous occasion, filled with hope and the promise of a future built on our shared beliefs. But honeymoons don't last forever. As the excitement faded, I noticed things that made me uncomfortable. The constant pressure to recruit new members, the financial demands, and the feeling of being watched. The cracks in the facade, once barely perceptible, were beginning to widen. One of the most insidious aspects of Scientology is its hierarchical structure. As you progress, you're exposed to increasingly esoteric teachings. One day, I stumbled upon a truth that shook me to my core. It was a revelation so disturbing, it sent shockwaves through my entire being. Suddenly, all the inconsistencies snapped into sharp focus. I was trapped in a web of lies, and the organization that promised to set me free had become my prison. Scientology's stance on emotions chipped away at our marriage. We were taught that emotions were weaknesses, hindering our spiritual progress. Instead of acknowledging our feelings, we were encouraged to suppress them. This emotional suppression created a chasm between my husband and me. Every conversation became carefully curated, our words filtered through the lens of what we thought we should say. The foundation of intimacy was stripped away, leaving behind only a hollow shell of a relationship. As the years passed, the church wormed its way into every aspect of our lives. Our social circle consisted almost entirely of fellow Scientologists. Our free time was consumed by church events and volunteer work. We were encouraged to prioritize Scientology above all else, including our marriage. This shared commitment became a wedge driving us further apart. We were constantly surrounded by others, yet I felt utterly alone in my marriage. Our lives had become so intertwined with the organization that it was impossible to tell where we ended and Scientology began. Scientology encourages its members to report any behavior that deviates from church doctrine. This practice creates an atmosphere of suspicion and distrust. For years I confided in my husband, believing our marriage was a sacred space. But one day, I discovered the devastating truth. My husband had been reporting my transgressions to the church authorities. The realization shattered what little trust remained in our marriage. As the years wore on, I could feel myself changing. The vibrant, independent woman I once was had faded into the background. I no longer recognized the reflection staring back at me in the mirror. My husband seemed oblivious to the transformation taking place within me. We were living a lie, performing the roles of a happy, devoted couple for the benefit of the church. Behind closed doors, the silence was deafening, punctuated only by the occasional argument. The arguments started subtly, like whispers in the quiet corners of our lives. Disagreements over seemingly insignificant things always circled back to Scientology's influence. I longed for the freedom to make decisions as a couple, to forge our own path. But every time I voiced these desires, I was met with resistance. My husband had become an extension of the church's authority within our home. Scientology prides itself on its system of ethics, a rigid set of rules designed to guide every aspect of a member's life. Every perceived transgression required confession and atonement. The pressure to conform was relentless, crushing any semblance of individuality. The spontaneity and joy that had once filled our lives were replaced by a suffocating sense of duty. The walls of our carefully constructed Scientology life were closing in, leaving no room for the people we once were. Remember the vibrant young woman I described earlier? The one who embraced Scientology with open arms, believing it held the key to a brighter future? That woman was slowly disappearing, eroded from the inside out by the poison of disillusionment. The promises of spiritual enlightenment, of achieving unimaginable states of being, now rang hollow. The more I witnessed the inner workings of Scientology, the more I saw the hypocrisy, the greed, the blatant manipulation lurking beneath the surface of its carefully crafted public image. The realization was a bitter pill to swallow. I had invested so much of myself in this organization, in this marriage built on a foundation of shared faith. To admit that it was all a lie, a carefully constructed illusion designed to control and exploit, felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging that I had wasted years of my life chasing a phantom. And as the scales fell from my eyes, I saw the toll it had taken on my husband as well. The spark in his eyes, the one that had drawn me to him all those years ago, had dimmed, replaced by a kind of robotic obedience, a blind faith in an organization that had become his entire world. Despite the suffocating control, the ever-present fear of reprisal, a tiny seed of doubt began to take root in the fertile ground of my despair. It started with small acts of rebellion, listening to forbidden music, sneaking peeks at news websites critical of Scientology, allowing myself to feel the full spectrum of my emotions, even the ones deemed unacceptable by the church. These acts, seemingly insignificant on their own, were acts of defiance, a reclaiming of my own mind and spirit. And as I allowed myself these small freedoms, the seed of doubt grew stronger, pushing its way through the cracks in my carefully constructed Scientology facade. I began to seek out information from former Scientologists, their stories of escape and recovery fueling my own desire for liberation. I realized that I wasn't alone in my doubts, that countless others had walked this path before me, had found the strength to break free from Scientology's grip and reclaim their lives. And in the quiet moments, when the weight of the church's control felt unbearable, I clung to the hope that I too could find my way out of the darkness, that I could rediscover the woman I once was, the woman I was always meant to be. The more I questioned, the more I sought out information that challenged Scientology's narrative, the more terrifying our perfectly curated life became. The walls of our home, once a sanctuary, now felt like they were closing in every corner, holding the potential for exposure, for betrayal. Scientology's reach extended far beyond its church walls. Its tentacles wormed their way into every aspect of a member's life, creating a chilling network of surveillance and control. Friends were encouraged to report on each other, spouses on spouses, even children on their own parents. Loyalty to the church trumped all else, including familial bonds. I became hyper-aware of my every word, every expression, terrified that even the slightest hint of dissent might betray my internal struggle. Conversations with my husband, once filled with laughter and shared dreams, became stilted, carefully edited to avoid any topic that might raise suspicion. Sleep offered little respite. Nightmares plagued me, visions of being interrogated by church officials, labeled a suppressive person, and cut off from everyone I loved. The fear was a living, breathing entity, a constant companion that cast a long shadow over everything I did, everything I was. The isolation was, well, unbearable. I was trapped in a gilded cage of my own making, surrounded by people who claimed to love me yet remained oblivious to my silent suffering. I longed for someone to confide in, someone who would understand the turmoil raging within me, but the fear of exposure kept my lips sealed. Desperate for a lifeline, I began to reach out to former Scientologists online, their stories of escape offering a glimmer of hope in the suffocating darkness. We communicated in hushed tones, using aliases and encrypted messaging apps, terrified of being discovered by the church's watchful eye. These virtual strangers, bonded by our shared experience, became my lifeline, my only source of solace in a world that felt increasingly hostile. They listened without judgment, offered words of encouragement, and reminded me that I wasn't crazy, that my doubts were valid, that I deserved to be free. Their courage, their willingness to speak out despite the risks, fueled my own desire to break free from Scientology's grip. But the path to freedom was fraught with danger, and I knew that every step I took had to be carefully calculated, every word measured. One wrong move could have devastating consequences. As my internal conflict intensified, so too did the cracks in my husband's once unwavering faith. The man who had once been a staunch defender of Scientology now seemed troubled, his eyes reflecting a flicker of doubt. Or maybe it was the growing number of high-profile defections from Scientology, the stories of abuse and manipulation that were beginning to seep into the mainstream media. I sensed a change in him, a subtle but undeniable shift in the foundation of his beliefs. He still attended church events, but the conviction in his voice was gone, replaced by a kind of rote recitation, a hollow echo of his former fervor. Leaving Scientology is not like leaving a job or ending a casual relationship. It's a treacherous undertaking, fraught with emotional landmines, and the very real threat of retaliation from an organization known for its ruthlessness in silencing dissent. Every step towards disengagement had to be carefully considered, every conversation a delicate dance between expressing my truth and avoiding suspicion. I couldn't just walk away, not without risking losing everything, including my husband, the man I still loved despite the chasm that Scientology had created between us. I began to subtly plant seeds of doubt, sharing articles and documentaries that exposed Scientology's darker side, framing them as intellectual curiosities rather than direct challenges to his beliefs. I knew that a frontal assault would only push him further into the church's arms. I had to be patient, strategic, and above all, protect myself. It was a dangerous game I was playing, one with potentially devastating consequences. But the alternative, remaining trapped in a loveless marriage, my spirit crushed under the weight of Scientology's control, was unthinkable. I had tasted freedom, glimpsed the possibility of a life beyond the church's reach, and I was willing to risk everything to claim it as my own. The tension in our marriage stretched taut, a thread about to snap. We were like two magnets, repelling each other with increasing force. Something had to give. I told my husband everything, my doubts, my fears, my growing conviction that we were entangled in a web of lies. Tears streamed down my face as I poured out my heart. His reaction was not what I expected. Gone was the anger, the accusations. Instead, I saw fear in his eyes, a flicker of recognition. That night, I knew our marriage was over. We were two ships passing in the night, the bridge between us irrevocably broken. Leaving Scientology was the hardest thing I've ever done. It meant walking away from everything I thought I knew, everyone I thought I loved, facing the unknown without a map, without a safety net. The church made the process as difficult as possible, but I had tasted freedom and refused to be silenced again. With each step away from Scientology's grasp, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders, rediscovering the beauty of simple pleasures, a sunrise, a genuine laugh, the warmth of human connection free from dogma. To those affected, you are not alone. There is hope. It is possible to rebuild a life free from fear and control. Embrace the freedom that comes from living a life true to yourself.